Welcome, everybody. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the founder and academic director here at the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. Welcome to the virtual reading group. We are um, in the thick of it, in the midst of the activity of thinking. We're reading Hannah Arendt's last book, The Life of the Mind, in the new version, although it's not that different, at least at this point, but it's worth taking a look at. The critical edition just came out a few months ago, and you can also, of course, still read the edition edited by Mary McCarthy, and uh, published, and one that many of us have read and loved for many years. The Life of the Mind, right? Let's just remember where we're at. The Life of the Mind is imagined as, on the one hand, a corrective to the Vita Activa, the life of action, or the active life, which was Hannah Arendt's title for her book, The Human Condition. If the human condition dealt with those capacities or faculties of human action that were different from the Vita Contemplativa, the life of contemplation, Arendt says that there were some activities that it didn't deal with, including the activity of thought, because thought was an activity that, first of all, she said, nah, most of us don't pursue it that regularly. And secondly, it was an activity that most of us think of as quiet, as not active in the world. And yet she said, no, thought can be an activity. And and she's now coming to talk about and think about thought and thinking as an activity, as part of the active life. Why? Why is she doing that? Well, she says she was, in a sense, compelled to engage in this project because of her experience with the trial of Adolf Eichmann and writing about it and the reaction to it. She was struck by Eichmann's thoughtlessness, his inability to think about what was going on in the world and what he was doing. And it was that thoughtlessness, she says, that allowed him to simply carry on, um, and do his job and do his duty and be a law-abiding citizen. Um, it was that thoughtlessness that led him to become a participant in the greatest mass murder in history, or at least one of them. And so she says, this makes me wonder, right? Could it be that the activity, not the complacency, not the contemplation, but the activity of thought, could be the antidote to evil in the world? Um, just a quick note. I was doom scrolling today and came across a video of a lawyer, the lawyer for the um, graduate student at Tufts University, who many of you have seen the video of her being arrested by ICE. She was then driven in an unmarked car across many state lines from Massachusetts down to Louisiana. And apparently, when she talked with her lawyer, she told her lawyer that one of the people in the car said, "We are not monsters. We are just following orders." Now, I don't have to tell the people in this group that Hannah Arendt might very well agree with them. Right? They're not monsters. They're just following orders. Um, it's this kind of following orders, this kind of thoughtlessness, um, that she thinks makes evil possible in the world. Um, and this book is written as an attempt to raise the question: what is thinking? And could thinking, as an antidote to thoughtlessness, be also a kind of antidote to evil, right? She doesn't give you an answer. It's a thought experiment. And that's what this book is. Um, in chapter 1 of the book is called, part 1 of the book is called Thinking. Part 2 is Willing. Part 3, which she never finishes, is called Judgment. There's 4 chapters in the section in the book on thinking, in the part on thinking. And the first one is called Appearance, which we just finished. But very quickly, why does she start her inquiry into thinking with the idea of appearance? Well, it's because she believes that one of the real challenges for thinking is that it is um, deeply opposed to reality, right? Um, the world we live in is a world of appearances. We see each other, we talk to each other, we touch each other, we smell each other, right? The 5 senses. We appear, and it's a world of plurality. Um, uh, and on the one hand, we say that thinking is the mental experience by which we distinguish ourselves as human, right, from animals, that we're the thinking animal, the rational animal. And so thinking is core to being human. And yet, thinking is the activity in which we most fully withdraw from the world. Um, and so she says we develop this idea of a two-world theory, right? Um, that there is being and thinking. I mean, being and appearing, right? This is classic philosophy. And being is supposed to be higher than appearing. And she wants to argue no, actually, appearing has a priority over being. But before we get there, her point is that thinking is the um, ground for believing that being is above appearance. Thinking, she says, um, uh, is what she calls an authentic semblance, right? In the thinking ego, this ding on seek in which I think and therefore I am, uh, it doesn't exist. It's a fallacy. I mean, I know that there's no thinking ego out there, whatever that is. When I think in this ego, I take myself away from the sensible world. I can be, who knows, thinking in Mars or thinking in space. I can be in the West Wind. Um, I can think of myself as an animal or think of myself as an alien. I abandon all common sense. It's this sheer activity. It represents nothing real. It's out of order. It doesn't produce results. Um, and so it's a fallacy. She calls it a semblance. It's this thinking ego. It doesn't really exist. And yet, she says that even though it has nothing to do with the world of appearance, there's something authentic about it because um, we all have the experience of thinking. We all have that experience of being nowhere. We have that experience of thinking about things that have no sensible um, representation in the world, like justice. What is that? Or truth or courage. Um, and that these thought things, these thought words, she says, even though they're not appearing, are indispensable. They're part of what it means to be human. Um, and so she says that thinking, uh, which separates us from reality, which is about meaning and not about truth. It has nothing to do with truth, right? To say that God exists, we're not talking about truth, we're talking about something meaningful, right? It's a mistake to think that you can prove that God exists or that God doesn't exist because it's not a question about reality. It's a mistake to say that the triangle laughs is false. It's meaningless, not false. And when I say I am meant to be, I know there's a reason that I was put on this world. It's not a question about truth. It's about meaning. And so, what she says in this first chapter in the thinking part on appearance is that while thinking doesn't appear, it's meaningful. And that we have to take it seriously, even though it tells us nothing about truth, and it is not something that appears in the world. Okay, that's the first chapter. The second chapter, which we're starting today, and it gets really deep very quickly, begins with this chapter 9 on invisibility and withdrawal. One of the more stunning chapters in this book, right? She begins by saying, all right, let's remember that thinking, we're talking about thinking because it's one of these three mental activities that all withdraw from the world. So thinking, she says, and all three of these mental activities, thinking, willing, and judging, that withdraw from the world, the key that she wants to make clear here is that they are autonomous, right? Autonomous is a very meaningful philosophical word. It's a mix of auto or self, and nomos, or the law. It's a self-law giving. The point is that none of them, thinking, willing, or judging, can be explained by other things, right? Thinking, as she's been telling us, comes from this inner impulse, this what Kant calls the need of reason. Why do we think? I don't know. We think. We start to think. We start to think about justice. We start to think about unicorns, right? They don't exist, but we think about them. And if you try and explain why we think, she says you can't do it. It's autonomous. It follows its own rules. Same with willing, right? I will for world peace, right? Why? I don't know. I will for ice cream. I don't know. I can will for lots of things. The will wills itself to will, but no one tells the will what to will. There's no rational will, despite what Mr. Rousseau may have thought, right? Mr. Rousseau thought that there's a general will that we should all will if we're willing correctly. Well, Arendt doesn't believe that. The will wills whatever it wants. It may will ice cream. It may will chicken liver. It wills what it wills. And then judging, right? This is beautiful. Rembrandt is beautiful. There's no rational justification to say that the paintings of Rembrandt are beautiful. That doesn't mean they're not beautiful. It means that there's no rational explanation for it, right? The intellect doesn't drive judgment. This is true not only for determinate judgments, right? Because even if you have the rule that says all beings exist, and then you say, all perfect beings exist, because, of course, if you're a perfect being, you must exist. God is a perfect being, therefore God exists, right? The ontological proof of God. The problem is still that the rule, all perfect beings exist, may be a good rule, but to say that God is a perfect being is already an interpretation of the rule, right? It's to say that God is a perfect being, and that's to say that God exists, which is what you're trying to prove. And so what Kant said when he not disproved or showed the problem with St. Anselm's ontological proof of God is he said that you can't predicate being of existence. You can't say that simply that God is, because once you say God is, you've already, said what you want to say. The point is there's not a rule for interpreting rules. And so even in a determinate judgment that follows rules, the judgment can't simply be one of reason that follows rules. There has to be something else, some autonomous act of judgment that is not rule bound. And this is even more the case for reflective judgments, right? Judgments of this tastes good, which doesn't follow a rule. It just comes from the particular up. And so Arendt says all of these mental activities are autonomous. They don't follow rational causes. They come from an inner impulse. And they all depend in a certain way on a kind of dispassionate quiet, to cite Hegel here, a Leidenschaftslose Stille. You can't give a reason for them. They come out of nothing. And so some people, like David Hume and certain kinds of philosophers like him say, well, if there's no reason to these activities, they must be irrational. They must be simply the slave of passions. And Arendt says, no, that's a simple-minded reversal. They're not irrational, nor are they rational. They are autonomous. And she wants to take seriously the radical autonomy that attaches to these mental activities like thinking, willing, and judgment. And man, to take that seriously leads into a deep and dark place, right? Because if thinking and willing and judging are not caused by reason or by the world, they're beyond reason and they're beyond the world. Thinking transcends all worldly conditions. Thinking transcends reality, right? Will and judgment and thinking are radically free, right? It's not an accident that the word autonomy is another word for freedom. Autonomos, I give the law to myself. That means you can't give me the law. There's a radical freedom to Kant's moral philosophy because it doesn't come from anyone, it comes only from myself. And if that's the case, if will, judgment, and thinking are free, we can will anything. We can will peace, but we can also will war. We can also will the destruction of globalization or the destruction of a free government, right? We can will these things and we can judge reality free from reality. And we can say, look, the current liberal world order is evil. And that's our free judgment. We can also say the current world order is good. But the point is, these are free judgments, she says. Which is why, and we'll get back to this, her famous line, one of the most important lines of Arendt's, and it's deeply important here. There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous. Why is thinking itself dangerous? Because thinking is radically autonomous. It's destructive of the world. It can think complete fantasies and fictions. It can lead to crazy wills and crazy judgments. And so she's trying to address thinking and says we have to take seriously this radical worldlessness, right? This radical withdrawal of thinking from the world. She now makes a series of points in this chapter, right? And I'm just going to go through them one by one. First, our mental thinking, our willing, and our judging, these mental activities, do not directly change the world, right? What we think is not going to change the world, right? It doesn't even appear in the world. What we will is not directly going to change the world. What we judge is not going to directly change the world, right? They're internal, they withdraw from the world. On the other hand, if we don't think, if we are thoughtless, we simply accept reality and the world as it is and the prejudices of the world as it is, and we get busy in the world and we get caught up and we do our job and we take orders and we do not think and reality wins, right? We get caught up in customs, prejudices, busyness, work, and practices, and we don't give ourselves time to think, then the world will not change. So thinking doesn't directly change the world, but if we don't think, the world won't change. And so thinking can be dangerous, but so can not thinking. Third, our minds are fundamentally free from reality. As she says, citing Heraclitus, this is on page 71 of the critical edition, the mind is separate from all things. Sophon esti panton kechorismemon, right? The mind, sophon, wisdom, is kechorismenon, is from the word chorizo, which means to separate or to divide. The mind is divided from panton, all the world, all the things of the world. The mind and the world are fundamentally distinct. What this means, fourth, is that from the point of view of real world appearances, mental activities are fully invisible, right? You can't see what's going on. It's separate, it's divided. Now, she says in the vita activa, right? In the human condition and in the idea of the vita activa, in the thinking, in the active life, thinking is not visible. Labor and work, right? These are two of the vita activa, the activities of the vita activa, labor and work. You may not see labor all the time or see the work, it could be hidden, but you see the products of it. Action and speech, you see not only the products, but the activity of it. But thinking is invisible, both in its action and in its effects. You don't see either somebody thinking or what they thought. The exception to this is absent-mindedness. If someone is caught thinking and they run into the wall, you might see something like that. But generally, thinking is invisible. She then distinguishes the soul from the thinking mind, right? The soul is invisible, but in a different way, insofar as the passions of the soul sort of take us over. We blush with shame, but it's not intentional. Thinking, however, she thinks is something we can start and stop. I can decide to think about justice and injustice, and I can also either not think about it or decide to stop thinking about it. Thinking, therefore, is something we can start and stop, um, is invisible. It's outside the world, and it transcends the world or reality, right? No mental act accepts the objects of the world. So if I'm going to think about justice, right, I may have in mind the arrest of a student, or the or some act of justice or injustice that I've witnessed. But when I think about justice, I'm not limited by that. It transcends sheer givenness. Um, she says that the world of reality, the world of appearance and reality, is plural. But in the world of thinking, I'm largely at one with myself. I'm just thinking with myself. Now, she then adds that when I actually do think with myself, I begin to talk to myself and I'm in intercourse with myself. And thus, in thinking, I neither live in the world of plurality, the world of appearances, nor in the world of singularity, the world of loneliness, where I'm deserted by all human company, including myself. But I live in what she calls solitude, or a duality, where I talk to myself and I put myself into conversation with myself. And so thinking as this kind of soundless but not silent two-in-one conversation is an active and reflexive dialogue with myself. And yet, as this active and reflexive dialogue with myself, this ability of thinking and talking to myself doesn't change the fact that when I think, I fully withdraw from the world. I am no longer in the world of plurality, right? Uh, she says that in willing, right? If I have a ice cream in front of me, I could still will for chocolate cake. I'm not in the world of reality. I can will what's not here, right? The same with judging. I may really want this painting to be beautiful because I own it, but I may say, it's not beautiful. I withdraw from my immediate interests and the partiality of my situation in the present. Same with thinking. In thinking, we make present what is not present through our imagination. And she says that as a result of this, it's thinking that allows us to both judge and will, because both judging and willing depend on having things that are not in reality, are not present in our head, in imagination. And so there's not a hierarchy. It's not that thinking is higher than judging and willing, but there is a priority. But the key point here, and this is the really radical part of this chapter, and the part that I find most compelling, in the sense of one has to think about it, provocative, I guess is the right word, is that thinking desenses things. It desensitizes us. Um, she quotes Augustine here that a desensed thinking is a vision within. When we think, we don't see the books. We see ideas of the books. We see a thought thing, a vision within, a thought object. And this thought object is not simply an, an image. This thought thing is not simply an image of, sorry, this thought thing is not simply an image of the book, right? It's free from not only the book, but the image of the book. It's even further desensitized and abstracted. And so thinking and this activity of thinking is so desensitized, right? That there's the book, there's the image of the book, and then there's the thought of the book. And the thought of the book can select from many different images of the book that I have in my memory. And I can pick which images of the book, and I can even change them because I'm now in my imagination. And I can tell stories that move outside of reality and outside of the world of appearances. And I can speak in abstract words. And so, in thinking, I leave fully the world of reality, right? We talked about last week how in science you're still connected to the world in the sense that you want to still understand the world. But thinking is completely divorced, right? Separated, chorizo. Thinking is fully divorced from the world of reality, right? Um, Thinking is not about truth. It's not about understanding the world. It's about meaning. It's making the world meaningful. And in order to make the world meaningful, we have to think about people who are absent, who aren't here, who don't limit us. There's this radical freedom, and that's why thinking is dangerous. It's unnatural. It's out of order. And thus, she says, there's this close affinity between death and philosophy. And this brings us to number 10, to section 10, the intramural warfare between thought and common sense. Why is it a war? Well, she says, Plato accuses the many, right, of going to war against thinkers like Socrates and trying to kill thinkers. And she says, yeah, not so often. I mean, okay, it happens every once in a while, but usually the many don't care very much about the thinkers, right? It's more likely that it's the thinkers who leave the city on their own accord and accuse the many of being deceived, right? The thinkers think, oh, the many don't know what they're talking about, and we're going to go and start our own little academy or a university and live in our ivory tower and think and be separated from the world. But she says both these are wrong to an important extent, right? Because even the philosopher who goes and lives in Harvard Yard and thinks outside the world and separates himself from the world and common sense, they still live in the world. They still have to go home somewhere. They still need to eat. They still have a body. Um, and so the philosopher sort of knows that they are ridiculous insofar as they're just a mind. The story she here references is the story of Thales, the the Greek thinker, who is walking along the way one day and staring up at the stars, thinking and contemplating the planets and their movements, and falls into a well. And a Thracian peasant girl laughs at him. And Plato is very upset by this. And she says the reason Plato is upset by it is because all thinkers know that to some extent they're ridiculous, that the gift of speculative thought is a poisoned gift. When Tiresias, the prophet, gets the gift of prophecy, he has to go blind, right? To think is, in a sense, to desensitize ourselves from our body and from politics and the world around us. And we know that as thinkers. And so she says that while all thinking arises from experience, um, no experience will ever yield meaning unless we desensitize ourselves from experience and we think and tell stories and create fictions. And philosophy and thinking know these dangers of thinking. And too often, the professional philosophers amongst us get defensive, and we defend thinking in its bodiless, worldless regard. And the great example of this is Hegel, who she says is throughout all of his work is a running polemic against common sense in the world. And Hegel's whole goal is to, in a sense, reconcile is an art, reconcile spirit and matter, to make the world rational. And she thinks this is idiocy, right? Um, it's a complete fight against the world. And so what she's talking about in these two chapters, these first two sections of this chapter, is the importance of recognizing the dangers of thinking, of how fully worldless and outside of common sense it can be. And if we recognize those dangers, I think her hope is, and what she's suggesting is that we can avoid them. And we can still engage in thinking and judging and willing and these mental activities, with and yet and being aware of the dangers. Remember that we still are thinking, willing, and judging in a world of appearances. And so that's where we are reading these first two chapters. And we're going to that and now that we realize this danger, we need to start thinking again about these mental activities and what we're doing when we think. And that's what we'll continue to do as we read these sections. So I'll stop there and open it up to questions. Obviously, there's a number of ways you guys can involve yourselves. First of all, through the chat. As you know, please be respectful. And you can also go down to the reaction button, hit raise hand, and engage in the conversation with us. Last week, we ran out of time. There were a lot of questions, which is great. I'm always happy about that. Some of you sent me questions. One by William Conklin, another by Max Simmons, and also one by Seymour. I'm happy to come back to these. So if any of you raise your hands, I will select you ahead of the line if that's of interest to you. And I look forward to the conversation. I'll just start, but just with one. I wanted to take to consider Max Simmons's question from last week. He writes me that he's trying to grasp what thinking as activity thinks about, right? What do we think about when we think? And it's a great question. Um, uh, he says, I don't understand. I understand that it does not think about thought thinking itself. Okay, well, what does it think about? It, well, Arendt thing says it thinks about meaning. It's inspired by the quest for meaning. Um, uh, when I think, I pull out from my storehouse of memories and the imaginations I have, those images that I want. that conform to a story and allow me to tell a story. And so that's what the constitution of meaning is about. It's thinking, and that's what thinking is driven towards. Okay, Jason, you're up.
I wanted to address the part 10 regarding the intramural warfare, insofar as that there is a obvious validity to the notion of how can we think our way into being less evil? How can we usurp the um, petty mindedness or whatever it that leads to villainous type activity by achieving a sense of meaning? But on the flip side of that is the sensus communis on the other in the intramural within these walls, where that's the community, and the community values would presumably be reflected within the sensus communis. So is what are we leaving the sensus communis behind only to return to it by understanding it better through the meaning that we derive from the thinking activity, the storytelling to ourselves, the counter narratives? It seems like morality is going to be couched in that sensus communis. Maybe I'm thinking too simply about this.
Um, okay. I don't know if it's simple. Uh, so the sensus communis, right? Is common sense, which for her is a sixth sense, which um knits or sews the five senses together and gives us a common sense of the world of appearance. Um, in that common sense, yeah, um there are things and objects, but there are also ideas and moralities and judgments that go to making a shared world. Uh, and there's a morality. If you're in a Christian world, there's a Christian morality. If you're in a Islamic world, there's an Islamic morality. A Jewish world, a Jewish morality. An atheist world, maybe an atheist morality or something. Um, or a liberal world has a liberal morality, and um, and there's also immorality, right? Um, and so what she's saying is that to the extent you don't think, you just go along, you accept the common sense view of that world, which might include, the food you eat, but also may include your moral and ethical beliefs. Thinking is going to withdraw from that world. It's going to free you from that world. Uh, and um, just thinking doesn't directly change that world. And yet, once you begin going down that path of thought, right, you start to free yourself, at least first just in possibility from the common sense reality. But then you also open up the possibility that you actually start to question your common sense reality. And that's why thinking can become so destructive. It can undermine a kind of moral certainty. Now, if the moral certainty is an evil one, you might think that's good. But some people might think the moral certainty is what holds us together and keeps society uh, um, safe and secure and moral. And they think that you're undermining that, right? Uh, and so thinking can be either dangerous or liberating, depending on your perspective, right? I mean, many people right now see what's going on in the White House as a liberation from uh, a horrific neoliberal, ideology. And other people see it as the destruction of uh, a common sense, uh, liberal, moral reality, legal, and um, uh, I guess it depends what your perspective is. But the point is that the foment of thinking can be quite destructive of a common sense world. And I think a lot of us are witnessing that right now. Is
Thank
that,
you.
I think I answered your question, but I'm not sure if I fully got it or not. You tell
Yeah,
me.
there's the implication of what would it mean then if we actually do act on our thoughts and bring back what we have surmised and attempt to change the common sense, um, the social norms really is what we're talking about, is the social norms. And because we had a great idea, yeah, and we bring that wrecking ball to the general public and try and convince everyone that we've rethought what everyone took for granted, and we pass a law maybe that prohibits certain activities that we can think our way to being unethical.
Yeah.
um, that's I don't know that it comes back down to how does it returns to the common sense reality of in application, unless we're just going to go sit on our ivory tower or on up in the woods and hide from the community, I imagine.
I think it's an important point. And I mean, and this is really important for the whole book. Thinking is destructive. It's not constructive, right? Um, Thinking is freeing ourselves from the world, and um, it allows us to imagine other worlds. It allows us to imagine other ways to judge this world. Um, it doesn't build anything. It simply um frees us, and then in freeing us, um allows us to, in a sense, undermine uh the the strength of the traditions and customs and prejudices and perspectives of the world in which we were. Um uh and that's why thinking is dangerous. Not thinking though is also dangerous because it keeps us trapped in that world. And that's the and our end obviously prefers thinking to not thinking. Um, but uh she doesn't want to ignore or diminish the radical danger that comes in thinking. Uh what then needs to be further explored is how we can think, accept that freedom, and also uh uh you know make judgments that will not destroy the world but will hopefully improve it. I know today is Good Friday, so I know we're a bit smaller group than usual. So if people have not often spoken and you have an urge to ask anything, today would be a good day. We have a light day. Donna, great to see you.
Thanks, Roger. And thank you again for, I think, what's this, about the third time we've gone through this book, and I still have many, many questions. I do come back to this section where she distinguishes between solitude and loneliness. And I've often used it in my classes with students, particularly around the post-COVID times, where they wanted to use this idea that they were alone and loneliness as a bad thing. And I guess we have also started talking about things like the epidemic of loneliness, and we've turned this idea of loneliness into something that's not a good thing. And I often would talk to students about this distinction she made between solitude and loneliness. And it did change their approach to things, but perhaps I'm just being a little bit too superficial about her distinction there. And I wonder if you could perhaps talk to it a little bit more, given some time to do so. I mean, I quite like the idea of solitude as a positive thing rather than, whereas loneliness I see as a kind of a negative, perhaps. I'm not sure. Perhaps I'm not quite reading that in a certain way. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Um, yeah, so I mean, these are ideas that Arendt talks about in many places. First, I think in the origins of totalitarianism comes up a lot, but gets most serious treatment in the epilogue, where she distinguishes three different uh, um, things. One is solitude, another is loneliness, and a third is isolation. Um, Isolation is sort of um, being literally isolated, like in whether in a prison, but also you're not allowed to protest. The public realm is cut off, right? People are kept away from certain public venues, and so they have to live simply a private or maybe even social life, but can't live a public life. Um, uh, um, Loneliness means you can actually be around other people. You're not isolated, and yet you are um, um, abandoned or feel abandoned. That there's this complete sense of um, uh, uh, being without, not in conversation. Everyone's around you, but no one's talking, and you feel utterly alone, even though you are with other people. And then the third is solitude, in which it's most likely that you will actually be alone, not around other people, but you feel not alone. You feel engaged and alive because you are um, talking to yourself, and you're talking to yourself in a way that you imagine what other people would say, and you're actually engaged in this two-in-one conversation with yourself. And so for her, uh, you know, solitude is almost a precondition for thinking, because to think, you need to free yourself from the world, but you also need to um, begin to uh, free yourself from the plurality of the world, but not get caught up in the oneness of loneliness. Um, and so, yeah, again, good or bad are not words that she uses or I'm comfortable with. It's not that solitude is good and loneliness is bad. Um, Although loneliness can be pretty, as we know, incapacitating. Loneliness can lead people to um, depression and a feeling that their life is meaningless. Um, and uh, and it is this condition of loneliness, mass loneliness, that she thinks um, gives rise to a need for ideologies. What are ideologies? They are um, uh, claims that we have the answer to the universe, whether that's through racism or classism or some other ideology, and it makes us feel as if we're part of a world movement, that our lives are meaningful, and um and so she thinks that this deep loneliness um can lead to a kind of ideological totalitarianism that obviously is quite dangerous. Um, on the other hand, solitude, right, doesn't have to lead to thinking, but it can. And um, as I said, that thinking can be dangerous, but it can also be enlivening. I didn't talk about this at the very end of section 10, but at the end of section 10, she talks about uh how philosophers have known about the danger of thinking, and known about the way in which thinking is antagonistic to common sense into the world, but it's largely ignored them. And I said that the one philosopher who's most antagonistic to the common sense world is Hegel. And yet in the very end of chapter or of section 10, she says that even Hegel, in one often mistranslated remark, as she puts it in the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit, he says, the true is thus the Bacchanalian revel, where no member, that is, no particular thought, is not drunken. And since every member or every thought no sooner separates itself, that is, from the train of thought of which it is a mere part, than it dissolves straightway. The revel is just as much a state of transparent, unbroken quiet. She says to Hegel, this was how the very life of truth that has come alive in the process of thinking, manifests itself to the thinking ego as a drunken Bacchanalian revel. That thinking itself keeps us alive. And it's this idea of thinking as the out of the chalice of this thinking kingdom or spiritual kingdom foams forth the mind's infinity. And so she says, to understand that is to both take seriously the infinite dangers of thought, but also to understand their attraction and why we engage in them. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't think thinking is good, and I don't think thinking is bad. Thinking is a need of reason. It's something that we humans, she thinks, and Kant thinks, have a need to do. Some of us, I think, have more of a need to do it than others. But all of us have some need for thinking. And thinking can be both exhilarating and freeing. It can also be dangerous and scary and terrifying. And that's where we're at here. So I don't know, how you want to explain that to your students, but I think I think the best way to teach thinking is to read great thinkers and show them the exhilaration and the danger that comes in all great thinking.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee.
Yes, thank you, Roger. I'd like to get your reaction to the critical edition, at least as much as you've been able to read to date. And let me just say that I've heard that Arendt went through 9 drafts of the human condition. Okay, and it's a masterpiece because she's able to. It's just the writing is takes you from one point right into another point. There's a fluency and a tightness to it that one also sees in her in essays in Between Past and Future, on revolution, and even in Eichmann to some extent. Um, to is the does the Has the critical edition been able to take what Arendt has written and somehow massage it into a piece of writing that resembles her earlier works? And let me just add, is that one-day seminar that was took place about a month or so ago at Bard on the critical edition, is that available on YouTube to look
So
at? So
unfortunately not. That seminar is not. There is a discussion. I did interview 2 of the editors of the critical edition, along with one of the general editors of the critical edition, about the Life of the Mind edition uh, on the radio show that I do called For the Love of the World, and that is available online. I think it's also eventually going to be an episode of the podcast. Yana, has it? I don't know if Yana's here or not, but I don't think it's yet been
I'm
posted.
here. Yeah,
Has it been-
we haven't released it, but I'll put the Radio Kingston episode in the chat.
Right. So you can listen to a discussion with them on the Radio Kingston episode, but it will eventually be released on the podcast as well. And so you can listen to that either way. Just to answer Lee's you know, preliminary question or first question. So if anything, the principles of the critical edition would make it less like her earlier writing, in the sense that, you know, as you said, some of these earlier books went through many editions, had many people edit them, right? Very famously, Alfred Kazin, deeply and very carefully edited The Origins of Totalitarianism to help Arendt with her English, right? You know, have to remember Arendt had just gotten to the United States in 1940. It's published in 1950. And when she first wrote The Origins, there were a lot of, you know, problems with the English. Alfred Kazin, who became a very close friend of hers, did a huge amount of work with her to turn that into English. Some people would think they failed, but I know some people don't like the English in it. But he did. W.H. Auden did a lot of work with her on the human condition, right? And helped edit that. So you're right. When she died, she had a draft of the book on thinking and the book on willing, and had not started yet the book on judgment. But these were drafts, and no doubt, if she had lived, she would have edited them, and others would have contributed to that. Mary McCarthy was given the task as her literary executor of taking these drafts and editing them into some sort of a coherent idea. And the edition that was published of The Life of the Mind was edited by Mary McCarthy, who was one of Arendt's closest friends, a brilliant writer, not a philosopher at all. Then again, neither was Arendt, but and so she did so, and that's the book we've had for many years. The principles of the critical edition are actually against what you were saying, Lee, of, you know, trying to make it like if it were edited, you know, by Alfred Kazin or W.H. Auden and Arendt over many times. It's to go back as closely as possible to the original of what Arendt wrote. Now, obviously, that is probably not what she would have published had she published this book and had lived for another 5 or 10 years. Whether Mary McCarthy's is also probably not what Arendt would have published, right? And so, you know, we have this problem, right, of how to what's the text. We're not gonna. There's no way to get the text she would have published, and so the principles of the critical edition are to stay as close as possible to what she actually wrote in the final draft she left. Now, in addition to that, there are 500 pages of other things she wrote on these topics, which are added into this so that you can explore it more deeply and see where she wrote about it in other places, and hopefully get insights into her thought. And I think that's extremely valuable for those of us who want to dig deeper into what Arendt was after and what she means. But there's no way to make her text a finished text because she didn't finish it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Burma.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. About thinking and reality. What she is saying is so deep, but also we might need decades to understand with your help what is in it. So I see two components, and we might need some more explanation. On the one hand, thinking is divorced from reality, and thinking is a withdrawal from reality. On the other hand, as you said so beautifully, in thinking we make present what is not present. And I could add, thinking is an integral part of our being, and our being is reality. So if thinking is integral part of our being and of reality, then how can it be divorced from reality? And how is it possible that thinking itself can be dangerous if there are no dangerous thoughts? So for me, this is these two components and their implications in terms of dangerous thoughts or thinking itself being dangerous. I would need you very much to get more explanation as a help to understand Hannah Arendt.
Thank you, Burma. It's great. I mean, look, to me, these pages that we're talking about and what you just mentioned are some of the most provocative pages that she wrote. And to take it seriously is a life project. And so I think you're absolutely right. All of us live in a world, and it's an apparent world. And as we've talked about for the last 2 or 3 months, the world of appearances for her has a priority over the world of being. We are all fundamentally plural appearing beings. And yet, the thinking ego is not maybe a fallacy, maybe a semblance, but it's not an inauthentic semblance. It's not simply a dogma. It's also real. Real in the sense that all of us appearing human beings can understand it and have a need for it. And so thinking and this thinking ego is fundamentally separate from the world. And yet, just like science is still tied back to the world because it's trying to understand the world, thinking, she thinks, is also tied back. Now, so far, she hasn't told us why. She simply says that it is because we're of the world. Next week, we'll begin to talk about language. And one of the more controversial, in the sense that social scientists and psychologists disagree about it, so controversial in that sense. One of the more controversial ideas is that she thinks that we can't think outside of language, right? We can only think linguistically, right? And because of that, even when we think and are separated from the world, because we think in language, which is connected to the world, there's a bridge, as she's going to put it in chapter 13, between thinking and the world. Even without getting that far, right? Even in what we're reading for this week, right? What she's saying is that the philosophers, sometimes act as if they just want to kill the world, right? Descartes says basically, if we could just free ourselves from the body, we could actually think. Plato, right, says similar things. The body holds us back. And if we want to be real thinkers, we have to be an ascetic. We have to starve the body, separate ourselves from the body. Think of certain religions that try and meditate as a way of freeing ourselves from the bodily needs and imagining pure thought outside of that, a kind of nirvana of some sort. And she says that, yeah, some people think that, and yet she thinks the great philosophers also understand that there's something missing in such a rebellion or war against the body and against the world, which is why she makes a very important move to say it's not just a war between thought and common sense, but it's an intramural war, right? We're all on both sides of it. Every single one of us has an urge to think and free ourselves from the world, but every single one of us also understands the needs of our body, and in the end is caught up in the world in a way that they don't want to let it go completely. And so it's that intramural warfare that she's interested in, because she thinks every one of us is on both sides of this issue. I hope that's helpful. But I will say, to me, this is to take seriously some of these thoughts about the radical freedom of thinking, and yet, as I've just said, that freedom is also in some ways going to still be caught and tied to the world through language, through the body. What does it mean to think? This is a huge question for artificial intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence is getting really good. And I just read a piece this week about the way in which artificial intelligence is trying to express feelings, right? Pain or suffering, and understand them. And yet, and so it becomes a real question of, can you be intelligent without a body? Can an artificial intelligence exist that has never felt physical agony, or has never blushed, or has never tripped? What is the role of the body in thinking? To me, Arendt is raising these questions here in this book, right? But they are central to the questions of these debates around artificial general intelligence that we're having today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, sorry.
There's so many contradictions here. Last time I was really kind of preoccupied with the ostensibly trivial notion of meaning. But I think it's really interesting, particularly in light of your most recent remarks, Roger. I have become very interested in those occasions on which Arendt says things like strangely, strange, even weird. I think it'd be a really interesting project just to compile these usages. It's kind of like the philosophical usage of certain. But she does have a propensity towards using these words, strange, weird, strangely, etc. And I think it's really interesting that she ends this section with Hegel speaking of the distinctions that were made last time between truth and meaning. which is a questionable word, almost hallmark, let's say, and therefore disturbing, to assign to the arts and humanities mere meaning, whereas science is concerned with something like truth. But she ends this section, interestingly enough, which never of you brought up. To Hegel, this was how the very life of truth that has come alive in the process of thinking, this whole Bacchanalian revel. But what is a Bacchanalian revel? Bacchanalian revel means the indistinction between subject and object, interior and exterior. And for me, it's been very useful just to keep in mind that I think it may be a mistake to kind of reify, if that's even the correct word here, apostatize these various moments in a process. I'm going to avoid the term, obviously, particularly in light of the recent remarks on AI, operationalism, and this sort of thing. But this is thinking as a process. And I think she will go on to say, as she did in the chapter in Men Sick in Dark Times, about under what conditions one has the right, if not the obligation and duty, to withdraw from the world only to enter it at a later stage. And so I think all these contradictions are taken care of once we begin to see that these provocations, she's trying to get at these very minute differences, and these moments that she's talking about, the danger of thinking. Thinking is not imagination. Thinking is not willing. Thinking is not judging. But there are so many contradictions unless one really keeps in mind that she seems to me, talking about thinking as a process, again, not the same as an operation. There's something like, she doesn't use this term dialectic, even though she talks about Hegel quite a bit at the end of this section, but that's is something like that one feels. And these contradictions are very strong. And I'm not going to keep on, but thinking is not only dangerous, she seems to even imply that it could kill you. She also says not once, but many, many times, namely that the mere consciousness of our bodily organs is enough to prevent them from functioning properly. So that seems to indicate some notion, almost akin to Jakob von Utzko's foray into the lives of animals and men, with the theory of meaning that something else is going on. It's not just sense, but really some obliteration, whether through a Bacchanalian revel or whatnot, between inner and outer, and all these other different levels.
Thank you, and thanks, Anne-Marie. The relation or the connection between Arendt and Hegel is a fascinating one. On one level, one could read all of Arendt as a rejection of Hegel, right? Insofar as Hegel is the thinker of the dialectic, and thus the overcoming of contradictions, or and the eventual reconciliation of mind and mind and matter, spirit and world, and yet that's obviously woefully inadequate as a reading, and what you're, I think, pointing to is that one of the things that unites Arendt and Hegel in a profound way is their incredible engagement with contradiction and the fundamental contradictions of the human world. Whereas Hegel in his system seeks to, in a sense, rationalize those contradictions within one system that will be reconciled. Arendt does not, and obviously that's a huge difference. But the power of contradiction that Hegel sees and experiences is for Arendt thrilling and extraordinary. And this discussion at the end where she talks about the unsystematic and original experience of speculative thought that Hegel has when he talks about the Bacchanalian revel, is, I think, to her at the very core of what it means to think, which is to be alive and intoxicated by this power of yourself, your mind, to free itself from the real world, and yet also still in important ways be tied back to it and connected to it. And so I take it that she finds in Hegel's powerful tarrying with contradictions and negativity, a deep thoughtfulness and aliveness. That said, she doesn't want to embrace the systematic approach that Hegel offers. Your remarks about strangeness and weirdness are interesting. I'd have to go back. I don't have them in front of me, but it would be an interesting question. I mean, Arendt is interested in the ways things don't fit, right? In the ways things pop out at us and make us turn about and see it differently. And so I think that probably makes a lot of sense. I just would have to go back and look at it. But yes, your focus on contradiction is, to my mind, really helpful and right. So thank you. All right, we got 2 more and 10 minutes, so we should be all right. George.
Okay, just 2 quick questions from my Polish sources. One is you mentioned the thinking and radical freedom, and my Polish sources have a lot more experience with authoritarian thinking. So my question here is, what they say is that basically all political thinking is a tug of war between freedom and security. That second part, that is wherever we go, and things tend to swing from one to the other. Too much freedom is answered by security. Too much security is answered by freedom. Number 2 is really an overall question here, is again from my Polish sources who say speaking about Arendt and philosophy, we still haven't answered Aristophanes' critique of Socrates as an arrogant elitist who has his head in the clouds. Those are the 2 questions.
Thanks, George. Yeah, so on the first, great questions. I'm thinking back to the first line of my undergraduate senior thesis, right? That liberalism is the attempt to maximize freedom within the constraints of order. It's a long time ago. Yeah, I think that much of liberal political theory is an attempt to balance freedom and order and have as much freedom and as much order as possible in constant tension. That's not necessarily authoritarianism, right? That's liberalism. I don't think in this particular book, Arendt is necessarily concerned right with that, but she is, I think, concerned with how much thinking, which she thinks might be what frees us from simply accepting whatever world we're in can you do without destroying the world. In many ways, thinking can free us from prejudices, but we can't free ourselves from all prejudices. First of all, because everything we can think is prejudiced in some way. And we need some prejudices, right? You can't live without. I mean, if you were to be completely free and there were no prejudgments that you could accept, you would never have any stability. And she thinks we can't live that way. And so she says in one of her unpublished essays, that all politics is an attempt to free ourselves from prejudices, but not from prejudice itself, because we're always going to have prejudice. And so it's a constant attempt to free ourselves from prejudice, but also accept certain prejudices that allow us to have stability and order in the world. And I think that's right, and I think that's the challenge that she's presenting us with in these pages. So if you hear someone say we need to get rid of prejudice, or we have to have an anti-racist thought, or by which they mean an anti-prejudicist thought, Arendt would say that's just not possible. There are always prejudices. You need prejudices. No one can live completely freely of prejudice, but that doesn't mean we simply accept all prejudices, and that's the challenge we're in. The second question was about Aristophanes' critique of Socrates, right? That he's just living with his head in the clouds, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what she's saying here is all thinking is subject to that critique, right? The common sense Thracian maid is not wrong when she says of Thales, you don't know what you're talking about. You learn about the stars, but you can't see what's in front of your feet. And what she says is all great thinkers recognize that. And they, as a result, have to be aware of the dangers of thought and take precautions to tie themselves back to the world. I think that's what I think she would say. Okay. All right, John, you get the last word today.
I just want to pick up on what George was suggested with the Aristophanes. And Aristophanes was politically conservative, and he recognized how radical Socrates was, getting people to think, and the effect on young men who don't know how to think very well, but they want to think, and they see the connection between thinking and power. And so we have young men doing strange things, not because they're motivated to get at the truth, but they want power, because that's what Thrasymachus is saying at the beginning of the Republic. That's that justice is in the interest of the stronger. It's the interest of the stronger. Anyway, I was just thinking about our present political reality and how it kind of took everybody by surprise, even though it was well forecast in advance. They didn't know how to think about it. People didn't know how to think about it. And now they're starting to realize they have to think instead of simply assume that what has lasted for 250 years is in danger of disappearing. That's all. And I think people are starting to wake up and starting to think. That's all.
Thank you, John. No, I appreciate the reminding us of the politics of Aristophanes, Socrates, and Thrasymachus. It's a good point. And you're right that Aristophanes is a conservative, and he sees I mean, and by the way, this was the accusation that Meletius makes against Socrates, right? That he corrupts the youth and is destroying Greek society and destroying Greek ethics. Um, uh, and so, as nearly any serious reader of the Apology and will tell you, there's a truth to that. And in the Republic as well. I mean, Socrates is the opponent of Thrasymachus, and yet clearly Thrasymachus is a sophist, a thinker of some sort, and it shows the radicality of and the dangers of sophistry, of thinking, when thinking is freed from as Plato would say, truth, and simply in the service of power. Now, Arendt wouldn't say truth, right? But she would say uh, the needs of reality, and I think that's right. Your remarks on today are I think important. I think many people heard, I mean, one of the talents of the current president of the United States is his ability to speak so much and say so many things that no one knows what he actually believes. And I think there were a lot of people who, heard many different things and chose to believe what they wanted to believe. And I think very few people thought that he would be as radical as he has turned out to be. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think very few did. But I think you're right that there is a way in which the radicalness of the destructive thought is becoming apparent to people. That there is partially, I don't think there's a sense of what will replace it, but there is I think that people had not realized how angry and resentful he and some of his colleagues are, and how much they blame the institutions of the liberal state and the liberal world for them, such that they want to fully destroy those institutions, not really knowing, I think, per se, where that will lead. I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm certainly no prophet. Maybe they do have an idea where it will lead. But I think that there is a kind of joy and destruction going on right now that comes from some of this. So I think you're right. We're out of time. I see, Anne, you raised your hand quickly. Do you have a quick question, or? I'm gonna.
It's not quick, Roger, but
Okay.
it's followed, and I'll put it in an email in case we can pick it up next.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you all very much. For next week, we're reading section 11. Is it just and 12? These are excellent sections. I know last time we read this book, section 11 and 12 really caught the imagination of many of you. It's about artists and art and spectators and actors, and then of course language. So I very much looking forward to the discussions next week. Enjoy reading Hannah Arendt, and we'll see you next week. Thank you all very much.
Thank
you, Roger.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you all.